Our next speaker is Tim Alderton. He's a native of Western Pennsylvania. He graduated from Penn State in 2002 with a BS degree in horticulture. And he then interned in the education department at Callaway Gardens in Pine Mountain, Georgia. Tim then moved to Raleigh in March 2005 to work at Plant Delight's nursery. And then almost a year later, he came to the J.C. Raulston Arboretum, where he's been since then. He's a board member of the Piedmont chapter of NARGS, and in 2017, he received from NARGS the Award of Merit. He's here today to talk about the northern part of the Patagonia trip. So please welcome Tim Alderton.
Okay, you're going to see lots of plants. The list is a little bit, there's 5, I think, that I lost, or 4 that I lost to file issues. So anyways, but it could have been a whole lot worse because I cut about 35 or so different species earlier in the week, and that still wasn't everything that we saw in that northern part. So anyways, we'll need to get started here, and yeah, you want to get the light, and let's see if I can make this go right. And okay, so yeah, we were there from basically November 27th, we actually started the tour, and we finished on the 7th. This is not chronological because we would be here for literally days for me going through everything if we did it chronological. So I arranged, your list is arranged by plant family, and it's the family alphabetically, and then alphabetical by species within family. So yeah, I like plant families. So anyways, let's start out. This was actually our first full day, or actually first day there. It was before the full day. And we went up to Cerro Catedral, which was just outside of Bariloche, and that's where that picture was taken. Unfortunately, right beside this picture of the Neuquén Province I have here, I had a picture of Argentina, so you could see where the Neuquén Province is, but that's something I lost, unfortunately. But anyways, let's see, can I make a laser go here? I'm not sure. Okay, so we started way down here. It's not even showing on here, but Bariloche is right here in the adjacent Río Negro Province. And we went up roughly, I think it's difficult for me to see in here, but somewhere up in here to Cavahui and as far north as we went. So we went all through this area up in here, and we actually went a little off this map down into here on our first day, or a couple days. So we saw lots of steppe, we saw alpine, we saw some Valdivian forest as well, which was really cool, the contrast between wet and dry. The elevation range, I didn't look at the lowest elevation roughly, but I'm going to say around 2,000 feet for a lot of it. But we went up as high as a little over 7,000 feet at times. So it's not really extreme, but we did see mountains in the distance that were well over 12,000, which there's some of those here coming up. But this was Bariloche when we got there. So this is early summer for them, or late spring, early summer. Yeah, late spring. And still snow on those. Those are the Andes just to the west of the city, and right there. But this is the lake that right there that we were at, the Nahuelhuapi Lake. If I can spit out these names, it will be a miracle. But this was from that Cerro Catedral location that we went up to. And again, the Andes there in the distance. So our first full day took us actually to this Cerro Catedral, which is actually not terribly far from where we were the previous evening. But we spent the day there, and this was the little town at the bottom of the mountain. And we end up going way up here, and we had to take gondolas. I'm not good with heights, unfortunately, and it was kind of terrifying for me going up and down. But this is another view as we're going up. It's kind of ironic. They don't have too many tree species native, but there were a lot of pine and Douglas fir, and also redwood were naturalizing on this mountainside, which was bizarre. As you're going on the lift, you could actually pick them out, the redwoods. They weren't all that big, but yeah, we ended up here, and we walked a fair distance back down. So that was the first day. And I'm just going to show you an overview of some of the places and the ecosystems before we actually get to the plants. So this was the second day, the start of the second day, or full day, I should say. And this was out near the airport. The runway is just literally, probably 100 feet the opposite direction from where I took this picture. There's a fence. So anyways, all that yellow, I'll show you what that is later on. And then this was a picture from in the Lake District, which is where the Valdavian forest, rainforest is, and very different ecosystem from what we saw out there. And those are mostly Nothofagus species that you're seeing in there. And there's one I had to cut down here, actually. This is Ovidia. This is a Daphne relative. Unfortunately, that's not on your list because, well, I ran out of space. The following day, we went hiking at Cerro Chapelco, and in the distance, we could see Lenin, which is, again, right on the border with Chile. And we saw Lenin through a lot of our trip, and you could use that as a spot just to pinpoint where you're at. But it's, like I said, over 12,000 feet. We were probably a little over 7,000 feet when we were on Chapelco in reality. Then lots of steppe areas that we visited all along the road. This is northeast of Chapelco, northeast of San Martin. San Martin de los the Andes, as we're on our way to Via Paohenia the following day after that. So, but we stopped at this location. Very windy, and that's consistent throughout the whole trip. Along that same day, we were along the Illumine River, and very different from what we experienced some of the other days. We were on this road right here. This is a dirt road. That's the other thing. There are paved roads, but there's a lot that aren't paved. And going between what are somewhat major towns for them anyways, it's a very rural area. This is near Paohenia, and you're actually looking, those vehicles, actually I'm probably standing in Chile at this moment, but that's these vehicles kind of, it's like, don't go beyond there if you were just walking in. I don't think there were security people there, but it was just kind of a deterrence. But I walked into Chile and I was literally jumping back and forth on the border by looking at my phone. You could see the GPS would show that you were going across the border. So. But this was the mountain that we were at there, and we were up, on this side of it is where I crossed over on the rim. But this is Volcanbatea Mahuida, and we went down in here to see one of the violet species. It was the key thing that was in here. This is an extinct volcano, but we did see an active volcano a few days later at the volcan Capui, and here in the front is the Lake Cavahui or Lago Cavahui. We actually stayed in Cavahui, and we went and visited Cavahui, and you'll see some pictures from there later on. And we also went to Zapala, which is to the east of that. And this was more frequent than anything that we would see. We would see cattle occasionally, but you saw goat and sheep all the time. And you occasionally saw, if you saw this, you saw a gaucho there typically herding them. We did not see until the very last day on our driving back to Bariloche, we saw a native mammal, and that was the guanaco. And I screamed, as Cindy, Chris, and Nancy can tell you, as I was looking for them, and they were a quarter of a mile away at least, and I'm eyeing them, and I got all excited. But anyways, you might get to see a picture of that if I go fast enough. I do have one picture of that in here. But anyways, to the plants. So we start with the Amaryllidaceae, and this is actually one that we have plants here in the garden that are fairly closely related. The Iphions, if you grow those, sometimes are actually lumped into tristigma, and this is one that actually looks somewhat like an Iphion, this Tristigma circinatum. And we saw this at that Chappelle, the mountain that was Chappelle that I had the picture of Lenin from there, and I don't have all my names. Oh, Cerro Chapelco, that's it. Cerro Chapelco is where we saw this one. And this was on a cliffside. One of the other members of the crew found this one and pointed it out. But we had seen a couple other species several other times. We saw these at lower elevations as well. This one, Tristigma nivale, which is this kind of green flowered one, and a little bit taller than that Circinatum, as well as the much more common Patagonica. And this is a little blown out, but this picture is a little better. And we saw those much more frequently. From our first day, we actually saw this one. And it would be in the steppes as well as in the higher elevations and flowering very early. Also in the Amaryllidaceae or Zephyranthes. But this one here, going on this trip, I was calling it Rhodophyalla. They've decided to, if anybody knows the oxblood lilies, those are now being lumped into Zephyranthes. And this was Rhodophyalla arcana or Zephyranthes araucana. We saw this on one of our, towards the end of the trip at Salto Algrio, near Cavahui, actually. And we just saw a few of those. And then near Zapala is where we actually saw this one. This is Zephyranthes galiciana. And that's Chris taking that photo right there. So, but this was much more spectacular. This was actually real close to the Zephyranthes araucana, probably within a half a mile of that. This was a very different spot from that actually location, but this was Zephyranthes tenuifolia, and we just happened upon this large mass of them, and they were just really cool to see with these tubular red flowers. And they don't flower as repeatedly like some of our the rain lilies or Zephyranthes that we grow here. They flower once and they're done for the season pretty much. So we were lucky to see them. And earlier, Jim showed you this one. This is, we're moving on to the Apiaceae, the carrot family. And I just find these so ironic, but Jim showed you this one, Azarella macrantha, or monantha, I mean. And this, they weren't in flower where we were at, but again, these are like plastic and tiny. Patches might be a couple feet across, but only a fraction of an inch tall. So really cool looking, but very different from its cousin here. This is Azarella prolifera, which I saw them that were 6 inches tall, and I saw them that were 3.5 to 4 feet tall and enormous billowing mounds. They're a bit prickly. They're not as rigid as the monantha, but pretty cool to look at. And here's a little bit of a close-up of that, the flowers on there. So you can see those have little umbels, which are distinctive of the Apiaceae. And this is another species that we saw, Trifurcata. And this was actually in the same location as that prolifera. In reality, it was just underneath a stone there. That was on our second full day. So that was I can't spit it out. But anyways, it was southeast of Bariloche. The names are Spanish, but they also have the native language intertwined into them. So I can't necessarily use the Spanish to actually pronounce the names of these sometimes. That doesn't work. But the whole thing for the trip for me was to get to see these. And I have to say thank you to a few people in the audience. Bobby and Roy and Cindy Cromwell in particular made this trip possible for me. And I told Cindy this was the day after this one actually, but still getting to see the Araucaria was the biggest part of my trip for me. It was to see these in the wild was breathtaking. So this was along the Illuminae River as we're approaching the town of Illuminae, actually. And they were the first opportunity for us to see them in the wild, and these were some large ones. This was at the mountain that I'd said we're actually, Chile is just right over this ridge here. And it had snowed the night before. And so there was some fresh snow, if you can see down in here on the tree trunks. And there were actually orchids and stuff in flower down in there too. But anyways, let's see if we can make this run. What do I do to do the next? Okay. let's see. So this was a little video. I was by myself for about a half an hour in the woods without even seeing a soul. And it's like you would expect to see a pterodactyl fly over or something. It was so primeval. There's a few of the Nothofagus antarcticus, I believe is what this one was, growing in here as well. And there were Gaultherias on the ground, which you'll see later on. And there's a brook going through here of meltwater. And there was Arissa ruelioides in there flowering, which again, you'll see these things later on. So, but this was a magical moment for me. And this does not do it justice, but anyways, if you ever get the chance to see them, it is so cool because they only occur in China or Chile and Argentina. They are red listed as well, so it's just so remarkable to see these. And then we saw them throughout the rest of the trip, which was wonderful. Moving on to a different family now is the Asteraceae, which I cut a few of these things. Some of them got cut because of my slide issues. But I think I got that off, or at least a couple of them off the list already before that. But Grindella, this was outside of Zapala. These were like 3 and 4 foot tall shrubs, and they were just coming into flower when we were there. So quite spectacular. This next one, actually, Jim showed this one as well. And again, this is one of my favorite plants I have up on the roof garden is the Hyalus argentea. And I had whenever I found out about this trip that Cindy and Nancy asked me in April of 2019 if I wanted to go on this trip. And they didn't expect me to say yes, I think, but I did. And we waited because we were going to do the 2020 and then we didn't do the 22 and we finally got there in 23. But to see this was pretty cool. I also know this is Plasia because we've had it in the garden for long enough that it's had a couple name changes. So it's a daisy relative as well. And another funky group are the Nothofagus. There's just a few of them here I'm going to show you, but this is actually an Asteraceae as well. It's hard to see in this picture, but these things are prickly up here, and it just has these funky growths. This is very architectural. This one's probably about 2.5 feet tall, versus some of its relatives, like this one, Nothofagus Legaceae. This was maybe an inch, and you look at the ground and you don't see them. So many of the plants are very cryptic there. And this was on that volcano, while actually this was on a steppe. It's just, they fit in different niches there. But this is one of the tiny ones. This is another one. This was our first day at, let's see. No, I don't have that one showing one here. Anyways, it was at our first day in the mountain, where I showed you that restaurant on top of the mountain that we came down. This was just below that, and this is a Nothofagus pygmaea. And here's a little bit closer, but you can see how tiny they are versus the fingers there. That's probably Marcella, if I remember correctly. But and you can see some flower buds starting to form on here. This is another one, wasn't in flower. This was at Cavahui when we were looking for some violets. And this, again, looks like little rocks. You don't even notice them unless you're concentrating. So that's a short list of some of the Asteraceae that we saw. But the Berberidaceae, which we think of as problematic weeds here sometimes, they grow all over down there, but they're supposed to be there. Much prettier than some of ours. And having just done a talk about Mahonia about 3 or 4 weeks ago here at the Arboretum, I learned a little bit about these. So apparently Berber has probably originated in North America and spread into Asia and South America. And I think they're more diverse in those locations than they are in North America at this point. So this is Darwinii. We saw this actually growing in the Valdivian forest, and it was a shrub about 6 or 8 feet tall. We saw Empetrifolia all over the place, I think, and it was on mountaintops and it was in steppes conditions. Tiny little flower or foliage on that. spectacular in blossom. And they might only be 6 to 12 inches tall. Sometimes they might be 3 or 4 feet. This picture here, actually, this is the microphylla here in the front, which Jim also showed that. And then back here, this is in petrifolia right here. So this is at just outside of Cavahui. And again, back to the Valdivian rainforest, we saw Berberis montana, and it was growing on the forest edge, not underneath the canopy itself. It's a deciduous species, while most of the other species we saw were fairly evergreen. And the first day we were out at Cerro Cathedral, we saw this Serrata dentata. It was growing underneath the Nothofagus forest as well. Similar situation to the Darwinii, but in a very different location. But I think we did also possibly see it later on at that same location that we saw Darwinii. And this one was also there. It's a little bit deeper orange, a little bit different shape of the leaf too. There's subtleties in the different species, but this Trigona is also interesting. So rushing on to, this is just a onesie on this family here. This is Bignoniaceae. So this is related to catalpas and crossvines and trumpet creepers. This is Agarilla bustiloceae. I'm going to spit that out wrong, but and you can see the flowers here look kind of like a catalpa or a trumpet vine, but this is on a ground cover. And the leaves on this are palmately compound versus pinnately that we think of on a lot of the other Bignoniaceae that we grow here. But growing out on the steppe, so it's only, the patches would be 6-8 feet wide, but they'd only be 6 inches tall. So they stay low to avoid that wind. We saw several cacti throughout the trip. This was one of the larger columnar type cactus or cylindrical cactus that we saw, Ostrocactus coxi, and we saw it in multiple locations. This picture was taken right along the Illumine River. We had seen it earlier in the day in the middle of nowhere. But moving on from that, oh, and actually the one I didn't get to talk about here, it's a Felugia or a species here, which I actually have that up near the Lath House. It's Felugia hystrix. No, not Felugia. Colledia hystrix. I'm sorry. Colledia hystrix. It's in the Rhamnaceae. So anyways, had to cut that one. And I lost a picture just before this. This is an oddball color here for this one. This is another cactus, Patagonica. And they're typically a creamy white and not this pink. But I had a nice video with one in the wind just before this, and it refused to transfer over. But anyways, the pink is not available, but I think I heard that Denver may have been able to get starts of this clone into the country. I'm hoping, because we can actually grow these. This is another form of Patagonica. This was growing on our way to Zapala on a very open steppe, very different from where that previous one was at, but nasty in comparison. Look how long the spines are on this one are relatively few, and that's ground hugging, while this one was about a foot tall and very nasty. Another species of Mayohenia that we saw is Peoquigii. I have this one up in our crevice garden actually, and it does flower. They are not as dense growing as they are in their wild habitat though for us here. This is an enormous patch that was probably 10 or 12 feet wide. And so it's one that we found that Marcella had known about it, and she said, you need to find this one. So we did. And you can see that there. But this was the following day, seeing them near Paoania, and Cavahui, I'm sorry, seeing them near Cavahui with the Araucaria in the background and the volcano as well. Those were literally just an inch or so across, tall and just a few feet across, but full of flowers. I walked out here by myself. Everybody else, we went to some waterfalls up in here, and then I said I'd walk home to our hotel for the night. And I got to see these while no one else did. So. On our last day traveling back, we came across this one. This is Mehuenopsis. Get all these syllables out, Darwini. This was in just outside of a little town. I don't remember what the name of it was, but we stopped and managed to see these. This is a bit more upright. The stems are much larger. And the color's much more vibrant on this than on the Meohenias. We saw a few species of pterocactus, and then this is Neuquénensis. And this, we may have seen another one that was in flower at the same place, but I didn't take note and get a good photo apparently. But these, if you didn't look close, these are about the same size as a horse apple, if you know what I mean, horse manure. And they you often saw horse manure right next to them. It was very ironic. So they knew how to hide themselves between those brown flowers and the shape. They blended right in. So moving on to a totally different group of plants, or the calceolarias, which Jim showed you a few earlier, and he actually showed you this one. This is Calceolaria crenata flora. So this is the parent species that if you ever bought a pocketbook plant in the grocery store in the 70s and 80s, whenever they had them, or you don't see them very often anymore, but this is the parent species, and that's primarily involved with those. These were just outside of, at a little park area at San Martín de los Andes. So this is borderline Valdivian rainforest, but not quite. But it was a forested area where we saw this one. And here you can see the close-up of the flowers. And take as many as you can, look at the shapes of the flowers. That's how you can distinguish between some of these. The tops and bottoms will be a little bit different. Like this will be big on one and small on another, and it'll be big down here and small, and the striping's a little bit different. So this totally different. This was outside of Paoenia on our way to Zapala. This was on a semi-alpine steppe region little area, very wiry in comparison. And this Phyllocaulus, you have a little bit of closer photo here. And as I was saying, look how big the top part is here. It's tiny, and versus the lower pouch. And there's no streaking on this one. Very different appearance. When you first look at them, they all kind of look the same, but then this is probably one of the most common ones we saw. This and Polyrhiza, which you'll see here in a moment, Germanii. This was growing in wet places or forest edges, as well as this is very much steppe, and it's hiding under a stone, but it was typically growing under slightly shaded places when it's on the steppe, while in the woods it would be out more open areas. But it could get up to 2 feet tall, while some of the one that most common with it, the Polyrhiza, was much smaller. This is a close-up of the flower on that one. And this, I had a video for the next one, but I lost it again. But blowing in the wind. This is the Polyrhiza. This picture was actually just taken outside of Cavahui on our return, going towards Zapala. I climbed up on a hillside for this one, but this was just a spectacular patch. And they're only about 6 inches tall, if that. And you typically get these in big mats. And so Polyrhiza, so many rhizomes, many shoots, and it definitely had that characteristic. And the last species that we saw was Volkmannii, and it's hard to see. I had a separate picture earlier, but I lost it. The top and the bottom pouches are fairly similar in size on this one, which is one of the ways you delineate this from the Germanii, which we saw at the same location. And I think we also saw crenata flora at this same spot along the Illumine River on our way to Paoenia. Aren't a lot of native trees there. Like I showed you the Araucaria already, and this is the other native conifer to the area we were at. It was Asteraceae chilensis, and this was just outside of Bariloche, but we did see them further south. And and I'm sure we saw them up around San Martín de los Andes as well. But that's our representative, the Cupressaceae. There's other stranger species further south. I'm sure Jim and saw some of the other species and genera that are down there that you don't see in this part of Argentina. The Ericaceae, so the blueberry family, or teaberry, wintergreen. This is which our native wintergreen is Gaultheria procumbens. This is Gaultheria macronata. I have killed this a couple times in the garden here. I don't think it likes our summers. I do have one right now in the nursery still that I haven't killed. But this is a bush that was in flower, and here's a close-up of that. The fruit on this can be white, pink, or red. And you'll see something very similar in the next species here, Gaultheria paopigi. And just in this one spot, this was underneath the Araucaria when I was in heaven. And you can see in this one spot, you can see the pinks and whites right here. And there's also red ones. And this species can range from just a few inches tall to a couple feet, but forms large mats. So anyways, onto the Fabaceae, the bean family, very large and diverse family there. And this species, Adesmia, was totally new to me. And we saw, I don't know how many different species of it. This was one of the most diminutive ones we did see, though, this REI. And then this is a much larger one, Adesmia boronoides, which has a couple, 4 or 5 feet, or let's say 3 to 5 feet tall probably on that one, and much more open. This is another small growing species, Adesmia corymbosa. And it's almost little rosettes, and then you have flowers coming up off of it. It was probably 6 or 8 inches tall, maybe 10 on a big one. Another shrubby one was this obovata, and this was along the Illumine River, as was that boronoides. We saw like 3 species within about a 100-foot stretch, if that. But we saw them throughout the whole trip too on some of them, like this one here, the corymbosa was probably one of the most common. But then you had ones like this. This is also in the same genus, and this is just a prostrate growing one, this parvifolia with the little purple flowers and that are just so beautifully marked. It looks like someone took a paintbrush on them and detailed them all. And then this large shrub again, this Volkmanni, and this is again along the Illumine River. And here's a close-up of the flowers of that. I wish I could get a hold of some of these to try growing them. I think some of them might make it here. If they wouldn't make it, it would be due to our soil moisture in the summer, I have a feeling. We saw a few species of Anarthrophyllus, and this one here, I think I was the only one who got to go see this one. This was when we were in Cavahui. Let me think. Is it Cavahui or Copahui, I'm sorry, in Copahui. The rest of the crew, we couldn't go to the spot that we were supposed to go. It was still snowed in. They were down at the hot springs, and there's a hospital downtown in this little town in the middle of nowhere. And Marcella says, "Tim, why don't we go for a hike?" And she abandons me after we get up on a cliff, and she says, "Just go up that way. You're going to find this plant." And so I did. I was away out for probably an hour or so by myself on the side of a volcano, and we found this one here, this Arthrophyllum burkhardiae. But the much more spectacular one you'll see here in a moment, this is a close-up of those flowers, was this one here, Strigula petalum. This was south of Bariloche, and that last one was as far north as we went, basically. And I was right when I took these. I mean, Chile is just behind that mountain. I was probably within a mile of Chile again, right there. So this was southeast of Bariloche. But anyways, these are mounds that are about 2 to 3 foot tall and 3 or 4 feet wide, and they're prickly, but spectacular in flower. We had seen one earlier in the morning that had just passed its peak already. There was another upright species I saw at another location where that pink form of that cactus, Patagonica was this tall, but it was just this open shrub, but they weren't in flower. But it was an arthrophyllum. So very diverse family down there, as well as within the same genera. You got these really diverse, very different plants. But here's a close-up of that Strigulapetalum. Very much, again, adapted to the wind there, those rounded shapes, and prickly to keep those guanacos from eating them. Of course, there has to be an Astragalus, which is, I think, the largest genus within the Fabaceae. It's found all over the world. And we got Pelene here, this little diminutive one. And you can see here, the pods are often as pretty as the flowers on some of the Astragalus. And then this Astragalus was Cruikshankii, or Cruikshanksii, I should say. And it often was purple, but you also got some white to pale pink forms as well when we saw that. And those were grown in the same place. Well, on our way, this was almost to, on our way to between Bariloche and San Martin de los Andes, we saw this Lythris magellanica along a cliff face right along the road. Spectacular color on these. I wish I could grow these. Wish our perennial Lythris latifolius was, or latifolia was this spectacular in color. But we got to see a really nice bumblebee there, and that's this normal sized bumblebee. So that's actually a good sized flower there. So. And if anybody read the article we put on the website for the chapter, I talk about seeing this one here, this Senna Senna Arnothiana here. So I tell a story about that. So if you want to learn more about that one, you can read that. Another cool plant that I had wanted to see when we were down there were the Genneras. And this is one, I've actually saw this one before at the Hilliers Arboretum in England, but to see it in the wild was pretty cool. And this is the tiny little Gennera. We think of Genneras as being enormous things. This was about 6 inches tall, but in wet seeps. But we did also get to see one of the big grown ones. This is Tinctoria. They were just emerging. These really were just like 3 feet tall. So not the 6-10 feet tall that they get later on in the summer, but this is in a ditch along the road. I don't know how, it has to be really awesome as you're driving down this road and when it's an active growth in the summer, but here's an inflorescence on that. So we move into the Iridaceae, so the iris family. We saw a handful of things in this family, and this was the most common one we saw, this Oniceum junceum. So the juncus-leafed Ulcinium. I can never spit that one out. It's very similar to Cicericium. There is a species of Ulcinium in the western United States, Douglasii. It's a nice pink. This also ranges from white to pink, but let's say 98% of the time they're white. And we did see a few pink ones, but I didn't get any great photos of those. But this was on our way back from just outside of Cavahui on our way to Zapala. And same place I got the Calceolaria polyrhiza photo that I showed you, and a seep on the mountainside, and they were just grown like crazy versus this picture is on a steppe-like situation where it's much drier. So this is pretty diverse, found over diverse ecosystems. Another little irid was, of course, Cicericium macrocarpum. So this probably wouldn't make it here much. I've killed several. I think I've killed this species. A lot of the little yellow ones, they're short-lived at best, a year or two, and they tend to fizzle out for us. They don't take our moisture. But we do have our native blue ones for the most part. And yet another little irid was this Solenomellis. Sagethii, and this was actually that same morning as that last picture. This was on the near Salto del Grillo, which was a waterfall that we went and visited. Anyways. just happened to notice these along the road as we were looking at some other things we stopped to look at Arboretum microphylla, which you will see here shortly. If you like pain, this is one. I didn't actually touch them, but this plants on the Loasaceae often have stinging hairs on their stems and leaves and flowers. This is a little vine that we saw just outside of Zapala. For this Pineaceae burgeri. There's other alpine type species, which I think we did see some in foliage only at higher elevations, but not in flower. Another in the same family I saw near that, the Salta del Agrio again this is much larger growing, about 18 inches tall, Blumenbachia sylvestris. I have some seeds of a very similar species I got through NARGS over on my desk. I have not planted them. I don't know if I'm ready to torture some little unsuspecting kid if they decide to touch it, because they're sometimes called electric shock plants and something like that, because they have like a nettle-like sting to them. So don't want to scare any kids, but it's not as spectacular as the sylvestris is from what I was looking up. So the Cornea butylons or a butylon bicolor, you may see it both ways. So the Malvaceae, these are shrubby butylons, and the colors, I had a couple other pictures, but again, I lost it. But this is kind of more of the blue-gray shade, and then you get some that are creamier shades, but just covered in bells of hibiscus or butylon-like flowers. And growing in the steppe, and with blue-green foliage to add to that. So I wish we could get a hold of some of these. I think, again, Denver has been really working to get some of this stuff out of Argentina to try out in the Western United States where the climate's fairly similar. But if they get them started, I'd love to see if we could get a hold of them to try them here too. So right now, if you go out in the woods, you might see some spring beauties. This is their cousins from South America, the Calandrinia, and this is a Aphanis. We saw a couple species, and Aphanis ranges in color, and this is from white, which was with the majority of the ones we saw, to pinks. And then also you see Graminifolia. I managed to find one of these again at the Salto del Agrio area that we stopped at, hiding among old volcanic lava flows and things. That's a really bizarre area. In the Valdivian forest along one of the lakes, we stopped at this to see this. This kind of gives you the idea, thinking of a crepe myrtle bark, but not. It's even more extreme as this Luma apiculata. This is an Emerticaceae, not related to crepe myrtles because they're in the darn, why did I just blank? They're in a totally different family. The Lythraceae, but the bark on these were spectacular. These are basically old growth. We have a few of these in the nursery that Mark ordered this winter, and I know we're going to kill them. They might be able to take our winter temperatures, but I don't think they'll take our summer heat. These were growing right along the lake. Very moderate temperatures. It was never hot, never cold in this location. They might get a little bit of snow, but really cool to see them though, despite that. And again, to some more of the trees, the Nothofagus that Jim mentioned earlier. We saw 5 species on this trip, and I have pictures of 4 different ones here, but this was our first day, and this was at Cerro Catedral. And actually, well, that's one side of the hill. On the other side, you go into a forest of Nothofagus pumilo, and we were all walking there. That's most of the crew right there that was on our trip. So this year, but very interesting to walk underneath these. This is the foliage of pumilo, and I actually think I had some flower pictures, but they aren't much to look at, that had fallen on the ground. But another location on our way to San Martin de los Andes, we actually stopped at a location where there were 3 different species growing all together. So I got Alpina, which is a big-leaved one, Antarctica, and then Obliqua. All on the same hillside, and these are some pictures from that hillside. The Antarctica, the obliqua, and alpina. They have subtle differences once you get used to seeing them. And on to orchids. So the Orchidaceae, and Jim showed a few. This is Chlorea alpina, which we saw this flowering in the snow as well. Actually, not far from where this picture was taken, it was still had some snow on it. And that is Berberis and Petrifolia there in the background. And yeah, they're so cute to look at. This is the most common. We saw it from steppe situations to the alpine. So, and a very versatile little plant. Similar species, we saw this near San Martin de los Andes. There was Chlorea barbata. It's a softer yellow and a bit taller growing, more florets individually. Again, the Chlorea magellanica, we only saw like 3 or 4 of these total, not in clumps like what Jim saw further south, but still spectacular to see these. And Chlorea odoratissima, this was also I think this is actually at the same place as, we saw 3 species at this one spot. So I think this is that spot just before San Martin de los Andes. But anyways, and Gavilia glandulifera, that was at San Martin de los Andes. And he also showed this Codonocorus Lasoni right there. I couldn't get a good picture of this plant. It was growing underneath the Nothofagus forest. There were fuchsias growing not far from this, as Zara and different ferns. There was an African violet relative, Miltaria, that was growing, not flowering, but growing still there. There's just so much cool stuff growing in these forests. So that was actually Valdavian rainforest there. Well, this was in another steppe situation, though. We saw these coming up on mountains, but we didn't actually see them flowering on the mountains, but the Oxalis adenophyllus. And I've probably killed all the ones. I planted 50 of them last year. And I had like 8 that came up. I was so happy. I got 3 or 4 flowers in the garden, but maybe one will come back up this year. Just to see these was spectacular. This was at the airport. Just outside of it. And I think that's probably where this one was taken as well. We saw them in at least 2 or 3 other spots in blossom. These were spectacular. This was at the Salto del Grillo. This is a little annual oxalis. I wouldn't mind having this one as a weed. It was just so bright and sunny. This compacta, we saw it in a couple other spots too, and they ranged from just a couple, fraction of an inch across to 4 to 6 inches across. So definitely compact, but so bright. In this patch, there were acres of them in this one location. This was on top of the mountain on our first day. Oxalis erythrorhiza is what this was. This was way up on top there, that chalet I showed you, that restaurant that looked like a chalet. There was snow and everything, and it was still flowering. In the middle, southeast of Bariloche, when we were out on the steppe, we saw this one, and this is, let's see if I can spit this out. Oxalis Nahuelapensis. Tongue twister. But this was growing with the Calceolaria polyrhiza mats, and not very far from it. It was really cool seeing this. The only place we saw this one, and you might be able to guess, was in the Valdavian rainforest. This is Oxalis valdiviensis. This was right where the genera were, the big genera, Cinctoria. So up on a little ledge above them, underneath an overhang of tree roots. Okay, so that gets through our Oxalis. So moving on to the Firmaceae. It used to be put into the Scrofulariaceae. I could say that so much easier. And also, these used to be mimulus. So this is the Aranthes, or Arianthes. This is Cupria, the red form. And we saw this in just one main area just outside of Cavahui, in a few different spots, but always in the wet. And then this one we saw much more widely. I saw this with the gunner. I saw this, we saw this in 4 or 5 spots, but this is Glaberata. This is a species that can be an annual or perennial, much smaller than the Cuprea and this one here, Lutea. And apparently the Lutea and the Cuprea hybridize readily, but you more often see the Lutea than the Cuprea, but always in wet spots. So I've mentioned Aricea a few times throughout this talk. This was the first one we got to actually see close up, and this is the tiniest one we saw. Fragrance, this was on the mountain at Cerro Catedral, the first full day. And tiny, as you can see. We didn't see many of these, but that was on top of a mountain. This was in the steppe underneath a ledge where it stayed dry. This is Aricea microphylla. And we only saw these in 2 spots. Very profuse, but super dry. Take that. You go from high mountain mesic to super dry to growing in waterfalls and along streams for this one. The Aricea ruelioides were always in wet spots. This is on a log in right above a stream here, underneath the Araucariaceae is where I took that picture. So always wet. So Jim also said about Embothrium coccineum. We saw it in various spots, but this was the coolest spot. This we stopped for lunch, and Todd Bolin and who's our speaker for the 40th. Julia, I saw them looking at these birds on a tree that they were too far away. They had binoculars. They didn't have a good lens with them. And I got pictures of them because I had my good lens with me. These are austral parakeets. And to go along with this, Anna, our other guide, she has a friend who's been researching the austral parakeets. And she says, she's never had any record of them eating the flowers of the Embothrium. So she says, can I give her this picture, a copy of that picture, with that, showing them doing that. So that was just really cool to know that I got something documented that scientists hadn't documented. So, but there was a whole flock of them up in there, and they just sat there for the longest time. But anyways, this one's kind of remarkable. We're moving on to the Ranunculaceae. The Embothriums and the Proteaceae, which most Proteaceae hate us here, and these do even more so than most. So don't even worry about trying to grow these. Anemone multifida, though, we can probably grow this. It just won't last long with our heat. But the irony with this one, and the reason I put this in here, is I've seen this in the Rockies. This comes probably from Alaska the whole way down to Patagonia at high elevations. In the western United States, you're going to typically see pink forms, but you do occasionally see white forms. But multifida is that widespread. So, and you often think about going across the north and south poles having similar plants, but not going from one pole to the other, basically, having the same plant. So that it's just kind of cool, the Ranunculaceae and having the anemone multifida. And one of the other ones that was the whole trip was to see this Caliamanthoides semiverticillata. We saw these on 2 different mountains, Cerro Catedral and then at Cerro Chapelco. This was at Catedral, and just spectacular seeing these. This was the largest patch we saw. We had lots of time to look at these because one of the other participants on our first full day had an accident, and we were waiting on them to slowly make their way down the mountain. We thought we lost them for a while, but we managed to get out. It took a while, but we got lots of time with the Caliamanthoides. Used to be ranunculus. It's actually easier to say than that, but so cool. There's pink forms as well. And I had a third picture, and it showed with a cricket on it and pollinating it, which Marcella had said, I've never seen one pollinated by anything. So, but I lost that picture this morning. So sorry, it was there. got now to a straight buttercup here. This was just a cool one. This pedicularis was actually growing in Cavahui next to a building near the hot springs. So that nice patch of that was just coming into flower. So the Rosaceae, there's some bizarre ones of those, and I think Jim showed you this species here, and I think you said you saw them along wet areas along the stream. This was in the open steppe, and the Magellanica was just doing fine and dandy there too. So it's a really versatile plant apparently. But we saw several species of Apiaceae, and this is the Magellanica. We saw at least 3 or 4, and this is Poapigiana, and I think I cut the others. But and Jim also showed Geum Magellanicum. This was near the airport, just masses of it in full flower there. And here's a little closer up. We did see them in other locations as well, but that was the best spot. This Oreopolis glacialis, this was in one of the first pictures I showed you. It's just, I said, I'll tell you what that yellow thing is later on. And we saw acres of Oreopolis glacialis, and we saw this from the tops of mountains to the steppe. We didn't see it in the Valdavian rainforest, but it was a really widely distributed plant throughout the whole trip, and saw it in different stages. This one's actually a pale yellow. Normally they're bright butter yellow and not this soft yellow. So despite the fact that you saw them by the millions, there wasn't that much diversity in the color unless you really, really looked. But there's a close-up of some of those. So that's in the Rubiaceae. So that's related to coffee and various other little things that we have. So anyways, something we do grow are Buddleias, and they're lumping them into Scrophulariaceae now. So I put that there. But this is Araucana, and this was near the Salto del Agrio that we saw Araucana, and here's the flower of that. It's not overly spectacular, but it's on these beautiful silver bushes. The one that I wish we could grow is globosa. It hates our climate here again, but it should theoretically grow, but it doesn't. But we saw these growing along the Lumine River. We saw these in the Valdavian rainforest, and we saw them in cultivation. They were planted in the towns. This one here, the globosa. And I've seen this one in England and in the Pacific Northwest where they can actually grow them and we can't. So anyways, I drool over that plant. The Fabianas, so this is a Solanaceae. So this is the potato, tomato, eggplant, petunia family, tobacco family. And the shrubs of these, I've seen these in England, and we got to see these in the wild here. They range from white with a blue cast to them to and they call this more violet sometimes, to some of these yellowy shades as well. They were anywhere from, say, a couple feet tall to 5, 6, 7, 8 feet tall. I'd love to get a hold of some different clones of these. I saw so much variation in these. It was just really cool. Another plant in the same family is, of course, Nicotiana. And this was, I think I probably was one, again, the only ones to find this one. It was on our final day at Laguna Blanca, out near the lake itself. And I just came across it. It was just a few inches tall. So this Nicotiana acalis, without stems, more or less. But one of the cooler ones, and I have like 3 or 4 seedlings if the slugs don't eat them of this down in the nursery I got from NARGS seed. Schizanthus hookeri. This is a poor man's orchid. It looks totally different than any other plant in a Solanaceae with that funky shaped flower, zygomorphic, and with that splotch on it. Anyways, really cool. So nasturtiums, or Tropeleum, in this case, Tropeleum incisum. We saw these from pretty early on our trip, actually the second full day, and never saw them in flower. It was our second to last day. We finally found these in flower near Cavahui. Actually, the first place we saw it was Salto del Agrio, and then from Cavahui on our trip back to Zapala, we saw them again. Along the road, but spectacular. But you'd see the foliage, but never in flower. I wish we could grow these, but they again don't like our weather here. So many of the tropeleums don't. So another big group of plants is the Verbinaceae down there. So the verbena family. And this is what you would have used to call a verbena. And some still do put it into verbena, but globularia, most of the ones we call commercially, the spreading verbenas are actually globularias now. But we saw Araucana, which is just a soft yellow and these domes, sometimes a little darker. This is another yellow one, and none of the ones commercially available are yellow. And it's like, someone has to do work with these to get us some of these. This is Flava, and this was near Zapala. And then there's Junelias, which is so diverse. Cespitosa is just this flat thing, but gorgeous flowers on an evergreen mat. And then this is, I can't spit this one out. I can barely read it, so give me a second here. Conata bracteata, another upright one. We saw 6 or 8 species, I think, total. This is Micrantha, and I have see how giant Micrantha is? And then there's this one. Chris found this one. So this gold-leafed one, a mutation. I think it's outside of Zapala somewhere, wasn't it, Chris? We have to go back and collect that one sometime. Yeah. And then Spatula lata, which was kind of more like a Verbena bonariensis. There's these long sticks, not dense like the other Genelias. And then this Genelia succulentifolia. There were a couple other genera which I cut, but there's one here coming up. This is right along the Illuminate River. This was spectacular there. But this is Tridactylides, which these color-changing ones start out orange and turn to burgundy. So just really cool to see these. And then there's this thing. This is one of the other ones. This was in the Valdavian rainforest underneath the Nothofagus in the shade. It was prickly and about 6 or 8 feet tall. And as his name says, prickly, spinosus. Raffitamnus, if I can spit that out. Really cool looking thing. The flowers were so jewel-like. They were actually quite large in comparison to the others. But there's a bunch of other Verbinaceae that are shrubs and things down there that we have not even thought about growing here. And so I'm almost to the end on this. I'm actually to my last genera, and the last family is the Violaceae. So the violets, that was one of the whole reasons to go down there, to see some of the violets. So the first group I'm going to show you are some of them ones, they kind of look more reminiscent of what we have, but there's some really nice yellow ones. The Maculata was one that grew out on the steppe, but it looked, you would identify it as a violet, as you can see here. But they're bright yellow and profuse bloomers, but they have the heart-shaped leaves like we have. And then Magellanica, this was growing in the Valdavian rainforest underneath Berberis darwinii in the Nothofagus. So again, shady spots. This looks a lot like our native Maculata. They're not Maculata. That's Maculata. What's our Vitifolia, I think, is one of our native ones that we have that's yellow. But anyways, you can go out in the woods in the next few weeks and you'll find some of these that look similar to these. And then Ricci, which has glabrous leaves that are a little bit more, they're not so heart-shaped on this one. We saw this one just outside of San Martin de los Andes. But then you have the Rosulets. These are the ones that you're not going to see anything like this anywhere else in the world. They're impossible to grow unless you're really, really devoted, I must say. There are some crazy people in England and in Canada who have figured out how to do it, I think. But our climate, I don't think they'd make it. But this was one of the most spectacular that we got to see. And apparently the year before, they only saw a handful. And we, I think, saw 13 species of violets. And only one of them, I think, was not in flower. So anyways, this is Cornifera, and this is the typical color, more or less, that you saw of Cornifera. And you saw some like this. And then I came across this one, and Anna and Marcella had never seen one that color. So that was so cool to find that one, and everyone got a picture of that one. This was on a bluff, kind of like really cool spot, anyways, in the middle of nowhere on a steppe. So many of the Rosulette ones are very, they hide. You don't see them unless they're in flower or they blend right in. And actually, yeah. So you have to really look. But that one was one that was much easier to find than others. And apparently they only seen one in 2022 of that species. And now we saw them by the hundreds, I think. We lucked out. They only flower for a couple weeks each year. This is another one we saw. We saw this one at Cerro Chapelco, this Dasyphila. This one was just covered. We found them at lower elevations that weren't in flower, but you got up higher where the snow had actually melted off a little sooner, and you get them in flower on these. This one was out on the steppe. This is southeast of Bariloche with the Patagonica and Azarella micrantha and it was Junelia micrantha, Monantha for the Azarella. I mean, all these things are growing with this little bugger here along a road, a dusty road in the middle of nowhere. You saw this S. condidensis. And so our first full day, this was at Cerro Cathedral. We saw the Viola petrea, and this is it over here in a big clump. Wait, wrong button. I might not have my pointer anymore. Okay. It gave out. So anyways, on the one side there, and there's a Senecio on the other side. But anyways, you saw them in flower. And most of them were this soft blue, but then you get these deep purpley blues. And then this is actually a little higher up the mountain from these. We saw the Sacculus. This is also at Cerro Cathedral. Pure white. Sometimes you'd see them in clumps, and other times you see individual rosettes. And then one day, as we were driving, I think this is when we were going to Peohenia, but I could be wrong. We saw this giant one, Sandaniana. Giant ones. This is an annual species. Oh, and I lost the other picture of that because I had a picture of it blown up. Darn. They're actually adorable, but they're still only this big. They're only an inch across the whole plant. You'd see the pink. This is another annual species, this Tectiflora. We saw this on the roadside. There had just been a grader through weeks before, and it's amazing that they didn't kill these. This is very similar to Volcanica, which is a perennial. And that one I thought I lost. Because this got knocked out when I was going through this. So this is another one, this Trocularis. This is a fairly large one, a couple inches across, but still cryptic. They just blend right in. I don't have this on the list because I wiped it off the list because I thought it was gone. It was the other one that disappeared instead. Anyways. Just really cool felty thing. It looks more like an African violet. That's how these are to me, these Rosulette violets. They look like the African violets, which aren't related at all. So, and here's Volcanica right there. So I think, oh, that's right. So I split out the last couple because there's parents of a hybrid. So this is Polysoma, which that is about the size of your pip or your pinky, about like that. When we were first finding them out in the open on this one location, just tiny. And you're looking out on this gravel trying to find this half-inch tall plant. So anyways, it's Polysoma. Here's a close-up. And they could be more like white to have a bluish tint to them instead of the yellow in this one. Here's a clump. This was the following day. We saw them in big masses, and they were inches across instead. But so that, if you cross that with this one here, cotyledon, this is one of the, we saw these down in the crater of the volcano. The one day at Volcan Betea Mayarita, and to see the cotyledon, viola cotyledon, and here's some clumps of those. if they get together with polysoma, you get this here, this blandlandiae. And some beautiful colors of those. And we just saw these near Cavahui. Is the only place we saw these. And this is when I was out walking by myself. A bunch of the others did see them. Oh, and look what's next to that one. I just noticed there's a dandelion. Dandelions grow everywhere. They've escaped. So anyways, I think this is probably the last of my violets, but quickly I'm going to go through some of the bird pictures because I do have birds. I like birds. I'm not a true birder, but I did get a few. We had good birders on the trip, so I could learn a bit. So that's on the mountains. Condors, we saw those. Flamingos. These rufous collared sparrows. I mean, I was 3 feet from this bird. It wouldn't move, but it's on a nice Nothofagus antarcticus right there. The geese, the ashy-headed goose. Caracaras, we saw 2 species of them. This is Chimingo, and then this is the crested. And the last day, as we're driving down the road, after having seen guanaco a few minutes before, it's like, Ria! They just look like a mound of grass walking. And this was a couple hundred feet away. You had to have eagle eyes to see these. So we saw like 3 of those. And then a few miles before that, we saw the only guanaco that we saw on the northern trip this year. So in 2023. So anyways, I got to see my guanacos and my Ria. I was so excited on the last day. So anyways, that ends my extremely long and tedious tour of some of the flora and a few of the fauna of Argentina. Is anybody still awake?
Which pollinators did you see, as were many of the plants believed in bird pollinators?
So we saw some bees, and we saw there was a cricket on one of the pictures I lost, and the Calamanthioides verticillata. We didn't see a lot of pollinators. I think they said that I didn't see it. I wasn't in the right spot at the right time. They saw a hummingbird when we were in the Valdivian rainforest. And when we were in Buenos Aires before the actual trip started, I did get to see hummingbirds, of course. Some of the parrots, I think, might actually end up pollinating things as well. That Anarthrophila strigulosum, my guess is probably bird pollinated. There's so much wind. I'm sure there were little insects that got around to things. Ants, yes, ants. But for those colors and things, I know the violets and stuff. I wouldn't be surprised if it were done by ants. But yeah, so many of them, you'd have to be there just at the right moment because there's a constant wind.
First speaker is Jim Jahnke, originally from Wisconsin. He has degrees in chemistry and a doctorate from the University of Chicago. He moved to North Carolina in 1971 as a postdoc in physics at the University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill. He then joined the Environmental Protection Agency at the Research Triangle Park, where he studied air pollution, including such emissions as sulfur dioxide, nitrogen oxide, and particulate matter. In 1989, he became a consultant on acid rain and climate change on programs in both North America and in Europe. He lives with his wife, Gloria, who's here with him today on the front seat. Hi. And they live in Chapel Hill on a farm with 2 llamas and a cat and a parrot. And he's here today to give a short talk on Southern Patagonia. Please welcome Jim Jahnke.
When I was growing up in Milwaukee, I used to inhabit the Milwaukee Public Library and looking for something interesting to read. And one time I came across a book by a man named Rockwell Kent. He was a artist and also a writer, but he liked Antarctica and the Arctic. And he also did woodcuts. And he wrote a book about the Magellan Straits, and here's one of his woodcuts. It was quite, actually, I thought it was quite neat because here's these brooding clouds, and you have shafts of light coming down to the ground. I says, gee, I'd like to go there sometime. And it took a long time for me to get there because it's far away. It's difficult to get there, somewhat expensive, but one of the main things, it takes time. And time when you're working, you don't have too much of that. But when the NARGS tour came up, here, we're now retired. Now is the time to do it. So we signed up for the 2020 trip, but it was canceled because of COVID. Finally, in 22, we went to both the northern and the southern addendum to the trip. So now we had our chance to see Patagonia. In preparation for this, we got the book by our tour guide, Marcela Ferraya, and we looked at that book. It's very nice and good, very helpful handbook for the trip. But we noticed here one flower which looked rather interesting, and that is the Calceolera uniflora. You look that up, and it has a number of common names for itself, such as Darwin's slipper, the virgin slipper, the Maine slipper, or the Zapatita de la Virgen. So we thought, well, with all those common names, it must have something going for it. So we'll make this one of our goals, is to see if we can find this this flower, the Calceolera uniflora. So in the beginning of our trip, actually, I'm counting the day when we left Xochmalal, which is the last day of our northern trip. We went from Xochmalal to Neuquén, and before we turned off the road to Neuquén, we saw this bush of Hyalus argentea, a very beautiful lavender flower, a nice bush. Actually, we have one here at Raulston in the on the north side of the building. On the way, we saw, Neuquén is noted for its large fossil dinosaurs, some that can grow up to like 120 feet in length, 77 tons or so. There's a skeleton of one in the Natural Museum, in a field museum in Chicago. But we actually saw one of these dinosaurs here. This is the Neuquensaurus metallica in Neuquén. This is 30 foot long, weighs 4 tons. We got in Neuquén in the late afternoon, and actually it was the day of the quarterfinal for the World Cup. Argentina was playing the Netherlands. They won 4-3 in overtime. And also we had a party with the Argentinians there. And we're saying goodbye to those of our party who were not going on the extension down to Southern Patagonia. So the idea was we would then the next morning fly up to Cordoba and then fly down to El Calafate, where we would start our tour of the southern part. Unfortunately, we got on the plane and we flew up to Calafate. That went fine. I mean, to Cordoba, and that was fine. We had tea at a restaurant. Then we got on the plane to go down to El Calafate. Problem was, they told us to get off because the communication to El Calafate had failed, and there was no way to communicate, and the flight was canceled. So now Patagonia, southern Patagonia, was a difficult place to get to. So, and it was worse than we had thought or expected. So David White, our NARGS tour leader, and Marcella, our guide, they spent all afternoon trying to arrange flights for us to get down there, at least by the next day. And what they did is we had a group that had flights to Buenos Aires and then would fly down to El Calafate. The other part of the group would fly out in the morning, late morning, to El Calafate, not getting there until late afternoon. So basically, here we're going to lose a whole day of our tour. So this is the flight down to from Cordoba to from Neuquén down to Cordoba, up to Cordoba, and Cordoba we waited. The only saving grace to all of this was that we stayed overnight in Cordoba, and when we walked out of the hotel, we saw the ceibo tree, or Erythrina cristagalli, which is the national tree of Argentina. We hadn't seen that previously because it's not a steppe plant, like say moist and more cooler environment. But very pretty red flowers, and it's well known there. Flying down from Cordoba to El Calafate, we stopped in Bariloche, just a stop. We didn't change planes, but we got the chance to see the mountains and the lakes again. And then we flew across the Cordillera down to the southern part. Got off the plane, it was late afternoon, beautiful sunlight, just kind of a magical place. Rockwell Kent liked the brooding skies, the scudding clouds, and here we had it just from the very beginning. I might want to note and give some homage to the Tehuelche. They were the original inhabitants of this area and found a way to exist there. They hunted guanacos, but they were nomadic. They ranged from different areas. And they're very tall, 5'11" to 6'4" or so in height. And the Europeans, when they came, Europeans are just short people, 5 people. They thought they were giants. So the Indians there were known as giants, basically. But we did make it to El Calafate, and it was Christmas time, and here there was a tree there to welcome us. The next day, starting our tour, and now it's actually day 4 of our tour. It's supposed to be day 3. We missed a day. We're going to the Perito Moreno Glacier. This is Lake Argentino, which is on the way there. And Perito Moreno is actually the John Muir of the Argentina. He actually did a lot of the surveys. He established the border between Chile and Argentina. And he, many parks and other areas are named after him. On the way, we saw the black-necked swans, which are very beautiful, and they're native to Argentina. That was a treat to see them on the way. And then we got to El Calafate, and the first day, our goal was to see the Perito Moreno Glacier. Follow the green dots. You can see we go to a southern arm of Lake Argentino to the glacier. On the way, we stopped at a park where we saw Nothofagus batelloides, the lenga tree, which is a beech tree, a very common tree, large forest in southern Patagonia. You might note, those of you who have been to New Zealand, they also have large beech forests in that area there also. What's interesting, this isn't a flower, but this is a mistletoe, Misodendron punctulata, which grows on the Nothofagus. And also right near that, in this park that we stopped at, was the Berberidaceae microphylla, which is essentially a berry plant, or the calafate plant. And on that calafate plant grows a rust that actually in itself is very pretty. This plant produces a large amount of berries, and the Tehuelche was a staple food for the Tehuelche. And Calafate is the name of a Tehuelche maiden. And the berries are supposed to be the tears of the maiden who was prevented from her father from them hooking up and getting together. In this area, we also saw Gavilea lutea, which is a ground orchid. We also saw this in the northern areas, very pretty. Calceolera crenatoflora. Now, this is not the uniflora that we're looking for. There are various versions of them, spots and so on. Some people call it the poor man's orchid. But on the way, we got to the Perito Moreno Glacier. Here's our first view of the glacier. As a contrast, there's Embothrium coccineum, the Chilean firebush, which we also saw in the northern part. We've seen whole hillsides inflame with this particular flower, but here it makes a nice contrast with the glacier itself. The Moreno Glacier is large. It's the wall that we were seeing here is 3 miles long. It goes 19 miles back, and it has 100 square miles of surface area. The face of the wall itself is about 250 feet high. So it's quite large. But what's really nice about this place is there's a boardwalk that goes across practically this whole area. So you can get to walk across maybe about a mile or so of this glacier. And you can watch it calving. And actually, Richard Lang, he has a video of one of these calving events. So it was quite a great day, and you really can't stop taking pictures. You're just trying to capture it, and it's really impossible to capture it without being there. Here's the glacier. Here's a very here we're looking right from the boardwalk to the glacier. This is not a telephoto. This is just looking at it. There's Marcella taking a picture of the blue ice. This is our guide on the right, taking a picture of the blue ice of the glacier. But we're still looking for Calceolera uniflora. So if you look back into the woods from the boardwalk, we didn't see the Calceolera there, but we did see the Condonorchis lessonae, the Palinita, or dog orchid, again, a terrestrial orchid, and some little violets. Also the Geomaginelica, actually, this is in a rose family, and some people have used this in xeric landscapes. The Lutea was also there in spades. You see a lot of these. So the next idea was, well, we had lunch at the glacier, and then we went back to El Calafate, and we wanted to get up to El Chaltén, which is the trekking capital of Argentina, because there's a famous mountain, Mount Fitzroy, up just north of El Chaltén. To go that, we go on the La Leona. We have a road that's on the side of the La Leona River, and we stopped at La Leona, which once was a place to stop across a ferry place. It's noted for the fact that Butch Cassidy and the Sundance Kid spent about a month here because they just robbed a bank and they were in hiding. Finally, they were found out and they had to go run up to Bolivia. But they have. So you can say Butch Cassidy and the Sundance Kid slept there. So on the way, we saw guanacos, herds of guanacos. Here's a male overlooking, looking for danger for the cougars that might go on his herd. But it's getting towards evening, and here again, you get some beautiful sunsets, Patagonian sunset. But the weather started to change. And here, this is a picture worthy of Rockwell, Kent. We have the light coming through the clouds, a brooding landscape, something impending. And we wanted to see Mount Fitzroy, but coming up to Mount Fitzroy is up here somewhere. And we're a little worried about this. Mount Fitzroy is also called Châtain. Châtain means smoky mountain. It's the Tehuelche name for the mountain. And Fitzroy was actually the captain on the second voyage of the Darwin expeditions, and was named that by Pietro Marino. So we woke up in the morning in El Chaltén and the surrounds. Here it was still smoky. We still aren't seeing the mountain itself. It's about over 11,000 feet high, so we should be able to see it, but no. 10 is a trekking town. If you're fit and hardy, you go trek and go around, hiking around the mountain above the tree line. So you have to be hardy to do that. So what we decided to do we had an option in the group. We could either trek the mountain, or we could go continuing our search for the Calceolera uniflora. So most of us, being botanizers as well, and not fit and hardy to go hiking around in the mountain scree, we decided to go and look along the river at the Rio de las Vueltas to find the Calceolera uniflora. But some did go on the hike, and David White did, so he kind of helped lead that party. So to find this this flower. We went to a steppe area near the Rio de los Fuertes where we did some botanizing. Here we saw this is very windy mountain, winds coming down from the mountains, very dry. It can be very hot. We saw the Azarella montana. This is a neat plant that we'd seen further north also. We have these buttery yellow flowers and a green mat, which can kind of creeps over and grows over debris and rocks and stuff. But you touch that mat and it's like plastic. It's hard. It's a perfect steppe plant. Nothing's going to get me. It's just like a rock almost. And also there's other very hardy plants hunkering down on the ground, trying to get away from the wind. Azarella prolifera, the Quinchomelium chilenense, and the Alderton-Patagonia. Also, there's the Escalina alpina. This is a bush, and it grows from subalpine to alpine areas. Actually rather pretty in these tubular pink flowers. But finally, the clouds were beginning to dissipate, and here we're beginning to see El Chaltén, or sea Chaltén of Mount Fitzroy. If you remember the previous picture, this is the road that was obscured by clouds on the previous evening. And here's the town, there's the mountain, about 11,000 feet high. You can go up there, but it's for the experienced mountain climber to go up there. And again, this is one of these places you cannot stop taking pictures of. It's just absolutely fantastic. It's there, and you are looking there in total awe. But we're still looking for our flower, and we're on the Rio de los Fuertes. This is another plant. This grows in wet areas. This is the Apiaceae magellanica, also called the buzzy burr is a common name for it. It's quite pretty there. We've hiked on a little stream up from the river. Here you can see Chaltén up there, peeking out from this other mountain. You see the lenticular clouds, which you see in mountain environments. In this area, we saw these little globular flowers, this thing called Tricuspidatus and Nothofagus bryodes. These are Asteraceae family, but they look like little mines, landmines or something like that. Kind of pretty. But we went to have lunch. We're still searching for our flower, and we had lunch. We went up this trail, which went into a wooded area. And this was a perfect lunch, better than any fine restaurant in the world. You're looking on the left, you see a lenticular cloud. You're seeing, looking in the north, you're seeing Mount Fitzroy. Looking to the east, you're seeing mountains and the river. But it's time to go. We still hadn't found the flower. So we get in the bus, we're all ready to go. And you do the count to see if everybody's there. Well, not everybody was there. Somebody was missing. It was Helen Redding. She wasn't there. Where is she? Is she lost? Did she fall off the mountain? So we all get out of the bus, started looking for her, and here she comes running down the trail and said, I found it. I found it. She found the flower. Just being a great botanist, she looked behind the shrubbery along the trail, peeked past it, and saw this glade of Calceolera uniflora. So all ran up. Time was not an issue anymore. We ran up there and went through the shrubbery, and there they were. These beautiful flowers, Calceolera uniflora, a whole glade of them. Marcella, our guide, was there. She was just ecstatic because we had got to see this flower. She climbed up to the top of the glade, sat down, and she just sat there and was totally pleased with herself, looking at us, looking at all the flowers. This plant, actually, it's pollinated by a bird, the least seed snipe. And what it does, it pecks at the white area to get at the sugars in the plant, and therefore it gets close to it and pollinates it. There's another name for this. It's called a happy alien. It's kind of like an alien. But it's a plant worth seeing. It's just really, really a fantastic plant. So we have been successful. So to end this part of the trip, we went to see the Torrio del Salto waterfall, walking through another Nothofagus forest. It's about 60 feet tall. And along the way on the trail, there's also beautiful stands of Chlorea magellanica, the porcelain orchid, which has kind of like a mosaic of green, white on its flowers. So the next day, day 6 of our trip, is today to go. We're going to leave. But we were pleased to find out that most of our flights weren't until late afternoon, that we were going up to the Estancia Huilichi and onto the balconies to El Calafate, which is overlooking the town of El Calafate. Here you see Lake Argentino in the distance. A beautiful day, a sunny day. These are horses on the ranch. The Tehualichi actually, some turn into gauchos, those that survive the European incursion. So right to today, there's actually, of Tehualichi descent, there's about 30,000. We saw some very nice flowers there. This sparkling jewel is actually a bogwort, and it's the Samolis spatulatus was actually on the road just after we got out of the Jeep that the ranch provided for us. There's also, we saw Polycala darwiniana. Some of you might think this as being familiar. We have the polygala, the French polygala in North Carolina in the southern part, which is pink, not white. Also some geraniums that are hunkering close to the ground. We're still in the steppes. And here, actually, we saw some more Calceolera uniflora, which were a little dried out and not as bright and new as the ones we had seen previously. So, time to leave. We had to go back through La Leona, and when we stopped, we saw this person here with a motor scooter and a tent. He didn't have the money to stay at the La Leona Inn that they had there. But Chloe went over to him and talked to him. And actually, he had driven down from Mexico City down to Ushuaia, down to the tip of Tierra del Fuego in this motor scooter. So we thought we had this great adventure finding Calceolera uniflora, but just imagine the stories he has to tell. So we went back to the airport, seen more llama herds, and that's the end of my story. Thank you.